Hi, I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial, and today we've got a video about zigzagging. Zigzagging was very common during the World Wars in particular, but a lot less so nowadays. So, what was it? Was it effective? In its simplest form, zigzagging is a way to counter submarines. That's primarily why it was come up with. Relatively early in World War I, the Allied powers started to convoy their ships to help protect them from enemy raiders, both surface ships and submarines. Submarines proved far more successful, and so became the more successful hunters. And because they were a relatively new weapon system at that point, entirely new ways to defend against them had to be come up with. And zigzagging was one of the first and most effective methods. At its most basic, instead of sailing from point A to point B in a straight line, zigzagging would have you alternating courses, still working your way in that area, much like a sailing ship tacking with the wind, but not just sailing straight on. To a small extent, this may help you avoid a submarine-launched torpedo. You can't always see when one has been launched. You don't necessarily know it's coming. So changing course relatively frequently will allow you to potentially throw off that submarine's targeting. These do tend to be point at a target or where a target is going to be at their current course and speed and fire. And if the target ship changes its course or speed at all, the torpedoes will miss. But more importantly, you're trying to throw off the targeting solution so that the submarine never gets into a firing position in the first place. Large convoys of ships could cover dozens of square miles, so even if your ship avoids a torpedo, several ships behind you in line might still be hit just because of how dense the target area is. Submarines, particularly submerged submarines during the World Wars, were pretty slow. Usually slower than the convoy ships themselves, even though convoy ships are pretty slow. And so if a submarine couldn't work its way in front of where a convoy was going, it was often very difficult for them to line up a shot. And if the convoy is alternating course, it's going to be extremely difficult for that submarine to figure out where the convoy is actually headed, what bearing their true bearing is, not the one that they're going off on, so that they can work their way in front to line up a perfect shot. Remember, the torpedoes during this time period are relatively short range, and while by the end of World War II you start to get some rudimentary guided torpedoes, acoustic torpedoes, things that kind of home in on ships, they're largely fire and forget, point at a target, and so they're ineffective if the target just moves course. As torpedoes become more sophisticated in both their range and their fire control systems, and as submarines become faster, more able to outpace convoys, zigzagging post-World War II becomes far less effective. While zigzagging may help protect you against torpedoes, it makes it more likely that your ship is going to collide with other ships. The most famous instance of this would be when Queen Mary rammed the light cruiser Curacao that cut in front of her because of a miszigzagging timing thing. The larger ship plowed over and sank the smaller ship. I think it took the C-class cruiser something like 6 minutes to sink, and she lost over 300 men. Convoys of ships have lots of ships operating in a relatively small area in all weather conditions, at night, in fog, and you're trying to limit communications as much as possible, because if you're transmitting radio signals in particular, other ships, other land stations, submarines, anybody can pick up that radio signal, and they might not be able to decode it. Maybe you sent it in code, but they can still triangulate where it came from, and they now know where the convoy is. So you're limiting communication as much as possible. It's mostly visual stuff like signal flags and blinking lights, which again, Not entirely effective when you've got reduced visibility. And so zigzagging becomes very dangerous. And so the best way to plan for it was to come up with your zigzag patterns before you left port, and everybody would have a zigzag clock on their bridge that's synchronized with the rest of the fleet. We're going to change course every 20 minutes, or a prescribed set of things. And on the first 20 minutes, we're going to alter course 40 degrees to starboard. And on the second 20-minute blank, or maybe 30 minutes later, whatever you came up with ahead of time, the entire group is going to alter course back in the opposite direction. And you keep doing that for random periods of time on relatively random courses that have been pre-assigned to all the ships in that convoy so that they can maneuver safely. And with these clocks going off, they are essentially a regular wind-up clock, and then they've got some extra arms that go around the outside edge, and when you set that arm to a certain point, when the minute hand hits it, it's wired into a bell that will sound an alarm, and you essentially know my next maneuver is to go 20 degrees to starboard, and then everybody does that all at the same time when that alarm is going off. Some sailors felt that zigzagging more helped them get on a wartime footing than actually helped protect them from torpedoes. Some studies have shown that zigzagging is only 15% better or at avoiding torpedoes than sailing in a straight line. Because remember, when you're zigzagging, you're not just going straight to your destination as quickly as you can. You're actually spending more time in a danger area because you're not going in that shortest distance. So there were a lot of debates even during the war whether it was actually being effective. But what it definitely was effective for was getting everybody on a wartime footing. This is something you do not do as a civilian mariner. This isn't something you do in normal peacetime operations. So the fact that you have changed operations really gets everybody in the mindset that, hey, we're in a war zone now. We have to be on our A game. I can't just sit here and goof off. I have to be paying attention. I've got to be paying attention to the clock. We have to post more lookouts than normal. They're looking out for the other ships to make sure we don't zigzag into each other. But hey, since they're up there, maybe they'll see a periscope. It's really helping mentally prepare the crew. And maybe just that change from peacetime routine was enough to help with the effectiveness. It's hard to say how effective zigzagging will be in future wars. It likely won't be used to throw off targeting, because with guided munitions, that's still going to hit no matter how much maneuvering you're doing. However, it may help with enemy surveillance to keep them from being able to tell what your end destination is. If you're constantly zigging and zagging, and now you're pointing at this port, then pointing at that port, they don't realize that it was this port up here all along. So what do you think? Was zigzagging effective? Do you think it was worth doing during World War II? Do you think it would be effective in a modern war? Let us know in the comment section down below. Battleship New Jersey receives operating support from the New Jersey Department of State, also from a number of other businesses and private individuals like yourselves. There's a link in the description below if you'd like to donate to support the museum. You can also support us by liking, sharing, and subscribing so more people find about us and the channel. Thanks for watching.